So we're here with Martijn. Martijn, how do you pronounce your last name again? I'm just going to butcher it every time.
You call it Reintjes. Martijn
Reintjes.
Reintjes. Proper Dutch.
Nice. Very cool. So this is your working caravan. Wait, show us. Can you show us it again?
Yeah, I'll take a step back.
So I feel like you need to be like a Jamaican guy smoking a spliff if you're going to own that. If you're going to work in
there. I bought it this way, and then it was like a very old one. It's actually like a classic Belgium style caravan. It's I don't know. I bought it for like a couple $100, and then I renovated it and put it in my garden. So it's now our COVID office, actually.
Very cool. And for those listening, it is a green and yellow. I guess kind of like mini Windstream would be the closest like US comparison. And where in the world are you, Martijn?
I live in the Netherlands. I'm in Utrecht, which is smack in the middle of the Netherlands.
Very cool. Yeah, that's what's the vibe like there nowadays?
It's rainy and it's a bit cold because it's winter, and it's kind of, I don't know.
Yeah.
Most places in the world kind of locked down and kind of not super fun.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we'll be over it soon. But to get into what you're up to, so we go back a long way, and I definitely want to get to Slack and chat apps and that whole world. But first, for those that don't know you, can you talk a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are now?
Yeah, of course. I do go quite some while back. So my I'm fumbling because there's so many things we could talk about. But
well, I guess to like guide it a little bit, I'd love to talk about CRO or conversion rate optimization, because I remember, I think we went to an event. We're both part of a networking, organization for entrepreneurs called Dynamite Circle, and you gave this presentation on conversion rate optimization. And for those that aren't as nerdy as me or you that might be listening, that's the idea of when somebody gets on a page, how do you increase the conversion rate? How do you increase the number of people that click through? And there were just like all these sacred cows that you were destroying about people just getting fooled and thinking they were smarter than they were with conversion rate optimization. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So I'm an entrepreneur, and I have been running a conversion optimization business agency for the last 5 years or so. I actually stepped away from that in the last year. But yeah, there's plenty of stuff we can talk about. Lots of interesting things there. So I, as an entrepreneur, I basically like to build new things, come up with new projects and stuff. So after a couple of years, I thought I had done my while there, and I'm starting something new.
Yeah, and to start there, like where do you see misconceptions and people kind of getting CRO, conversion rate optimization, wrong? Like, what were the things that you would observe where you're just like, these numbers they pulled out are BS,
So what's conversion rate optimization or A/B testing, which is generally what it's all about. It's not for the most of us. So you can have a very, very nice website. You might think that you have some nice traffic, but it's probably not enough to do some proper significant A/B testing on it. So the general very minimum guideline we had was you probably need like 100,000 visitors each month and do at least 1,000 conversions. Wow. Below that, you can't really make any significant findings there, because if you only have like a couple conversions there, or like 100, and then we do an A/B test where in general, like an A/B test, you change something on a website or on a page or whatever, and that's then your variation. And then you're going to test what if your conversions probably are doing better on this this variant, this change that you made, or not. But to do that, you have to split your traffic. So half of your traffic goes to your original site, half of the traffic goes to the to your variation. And so from those 1,000 people that converted actually eventually in that month, only 500 will convert on the other one, on one page, and on the other variation. So and then you have to find like a big enough difference between those. So you could have like 10 people converting from on the original more than on the other. But that could be like, and you say, oh, that's like a percentage point or something better. So that's obviously better. So the change sucks. But then 10 people difference on that amount, it's not enough. It's just it could be like a fluke of like, I don't know.
Randomness.
More people. Yeah, randomness, exactly.
Right.
So most websites don't really have enough traffic to do A/B testing.
Yeah. So why is that? Like, why does it have to be 100? Like, what are you seeing in the data that makes you say, okay, below? I'm sure it's not literally 100. Maybe it can vary a little bit, but why is it that you have to get over that hump before you actually feel like you have meaningful data? If that question makes any sense.
Well, then you have to go into the math quite thoroughly. Basically, because of randomness. If you have the more data you have, the more certain you can become about the results that data predicts. So if you don't have enough data, then you can have because of this randomness, it could become false positives or false negatives, where the data says like, hey, this variation is doing better, but that could be due to randomness. So the more data points you have, the less random those data points become, and the more you can say about it.
Right. And it seems like the entire ecosystem of marketing, is therefore being fooled by randomness, to quote the Taleb book, because almost nobody has that level of data. I mean, unless you're dealing with a big consumer site, it seems like there's precious few people that are working with 100,000 hits a month, 1,000 plus conversions, et cetera. So what's your take on that? Do you think that like who's actually doing this right in your opinion?
Well, a lot of people are doing this right. A lot of people doing this wrong as well. So if you don't have those conversions, like 1,000 conversions a month, so that is basically all consulting companies or agencies or whatever who try to lure people in, maybe via content marketing or whatnot, or maybe ads. And then they would be happy if they have like 10 new clients each month. That would be great for like a general agency. But that's such a low number that you can't really say anything meaningful on it. And a lot of e-commerce companies are also very happy if they do like 100 orders a month, like a small e-commerce store. They could survive on 100 orders, but that's still not enough to actually test on. So you kind of have to have like a mid-size e-com store doing about like 7 figures or something. Those are like the things, the metrics where you might start to think about A/B testing. Right. And otherwise, your energy is spent on better spend on other things.
Right. So, let's say that I'm an agency and I have an e-commerce client and they're getting whatever 5,000 hits a month, and is a few dozen conversions or whatever. They're below that line. And I have this incentive to go say, hey, look, we raised your conversions this amount. Oh, went down this month for these reasons or whatever. Yeah. And that's probably BS, it sounds like, because there's just not enough data. So what's the next best alternative? Is my only option to just say to my client, I don't know, it's just random? Like how do you handle that situation?
Yeah, so it's not, I wasn't in that space because we were doing A/B testing. So we were working with like a couple or slightly bigger companies there. But instead of like A/B testing and making it like a pure scientific numbers game, there's all sorts of things that you could do to improve a website, but you still need data. So from there, you might rely more on more quantitative data. So you could look into your analytics, for example, and see like, hey, how are people moving through a site? You could look at heat maps, or you have these screen recorder kind of websites which like show how a user goes through your website. And by looking at that data, you can get a lot of insight in how people are using your site. So for example, like you really want them to click that button, but everyone ignores that button. So something is wrong in the design there. So you could change something to make that button pop up more, and then people are so then you can say like, hey, more people are now clicking this button. So you could use more quantitative data or qualitative data to find those things, and then maybe target micro conversions and see if there's an uplift there.
Right. So it sounds like there's sort of these things that like probabilistically are just worth doing, and you might get some data from it, but you kind of have to just do kind of a trust fall that it's a good idea to do these certain things, even if you might not ever be able to prove definitively that it's brought in the lift.
So you could still look at the and like your data, like your visitors, or the conversions that are, or maybe the uplift in revenue that brings. I don't think you could definitely say that you are causing the uplift, but you can just say like, hey, we've been working on these things because of this data, and we now see that the data that your revenues are going up. So in all likeliness, we've been like helping you a lot.
Yeah, and don't worry, I don't want to spend too long on the CRO stuff, because I know you're doing new and interesting things. But this is where I get into meandering territory. But so I might not frame this perfectly. But I guess like how much did you feel a negative incentive to when you were in the CRO space to be more certain with clients versus being uncertain? Like how did you navigate that, where you're looking at this data and you're like, we're not really sure what's going on, but it seems like you would be pushed to have like a clean explanation for people. So anyway, I want to hear if that was a dynamic that is familiar to you and how you dealt with it.
Yeah, that's also something I didn't quite like about the industry. And it's more with agencies. I see that happening in the advertising space as well, PPC stuff. It's really tough to make a good sales plea and that you're causing this uplift while you actually know that you're maybe not, or that's not. So and you know each other, I'm very honest and direct, so I probably fumbled in some sales calls and stuff because of that, honestly. It's a thing. You have to be like, there's a lot of people, dishonest people in the CRO space who just like, so like, yeah, hello, or they're calculating the data in such a way that they look good, but that doesn't really work for their clients or their projects.
Right. Well, it almost seems like a lot of the people doing it have fooled themselves. They're their biggest victim, so they're believing they're smoking their own crack.
As well.
Right. That makes sense.
But that's also because people are not really honest about like what the data shows, and what data is hard. And if you're not like schooled in like how it all works and what the chances are and the probabilities and like all that, how it actually works, which is quite complicated to dive into. Yeah, it's very easy to say like, okay, this happens, and it looks good, so yay, profit.
Right, yeah. Right, and it's reflexive and it's changing, and so it's. I think there's precious few people that actually understand it. So I think that bears repeating, for sure. So I guess maybe I'd love to move on to just what are you up to now?
Right now a lot of playing with the kids because they can't go to school. But besides that, which might be more interesting to your audience, is I'm building Otira. And Otira is an online team interaction reporting assistant, or at least that's the Oh, now I kind of missed the English word. But anyways, Otira is a chatbot, basically, which lives in Slack and helps remote teams become more a stronger team. She helps create stronger teams and creates more like team interaction and helps the managers to become better managers by feeding them more data, personal data about their team. How it works is there's like a lot of like she instigates some like social conversations, but she also does like little surveys, and with all that data, she helps the team to bond better and become like a stronger, more personal team.
Very cool. And before we dig into that, I think that a lot of our listeners are, managing agencies or working, in leadership positions in agencies. And, I've always thought about transitioning to a SaaS product or doing it on the side or whatever. So can you talk a little bit about that transition and, what motivated you and how you went about that?
Oh, definitely. Because that's like, maybe it's a bit of like the grass is greener on the other side kind of thing. Like as an agency owner, you're like, oh yeah, let's build a SaaS so we don't have all these clients anymore, which I was very much also thinking of when I wanted to do a SaaS as well. But on the other side, I now also find that's like it's also nice to have like a nice juicy client that pays you like a couple K a month on a retainer, so you can work for them. So there's a different dynamic there for sure. But that being said, I love building stuff and I love doing projects, and so I feel that this is more in my my comfort zone than working with clients, because it helps me like define my own working hours and define my own projects, basically, because it's all transpires from me what I'm building.
Yeah, very cool. And to get into it a little bit more, so what inspired you to focus on solving that problem of building teams and working with chat apps and so on?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been like working remotely, working from home. That's like the big thing with the COVID, right? Everyone has to work from home right now, but I've been working remotely for the last, 15 years maybe. So, and I've been working with remote teams for at least 10 years. And with remote, it's like distributed all over the world. So there's developers in the South America or the Eastern European countries, people in the Philippines, Africa maybe. There's like been working with the whole world, which is super fun, but also super complicated it brings its challenges, of course. And one of those challenges is like, how do you get like a nice, good team spirit, good team feel in such a distributed team where you only see people through a camera if you see them at all, and like have like short interactions, or maybe you do like a weekly all hands team call, which is also complicated to do. So it's hard to create those more intimate personal relationships in like these kinds of teams. And loneliness is also one of the most the biggest problems in like teams like this, and that's also what a lot of people are now experiencing. Like, hey, getting a bit lonely just staying inside your house and not missing the comfort and the social interactions with your teammates.
Yeah.
So that was basically the premise there.
Yeah, I hear you. And I think that to some extent, I've had trouble kind of wrapping my head around the problem, just because we've been such a fish in water for so long, like both you and me, and then also our team, since 2014, we've been entirely remote, and we tend to work with the sort of people that are used to working remotely, and it hasn't been that disruptive. So I'm trying to bring this to a question, I guess. What like, let's bring this to chat apps. Like, where do you think chat apps fit into that? And where do you think they're particularly strong, and where are their shortcomings?
So when you don't have an office, you do need a space to come together as a company. And for a lot of companies, that is Slack, which is basically a chat application with a lot of different like channels where you can have different kinds of conversations. And other companies are using other tools, so you can use your your project management tool there as well, like Asana or Trello or whatever. But those don't really feed in the communication aspect of it. So as a team, you need to communicate, because if you don't communicate, you're not really a team. So you need a space to communicate there. And especially if you're like globally distributed with your team, things happen asynchronously, whatever. Then chat apps are really great for that, because I could like type in like an update or a message or whatever, and my teammate 3 time zones away just reads it in 6 hours and replies when it's convenient to her. So that's the thing with chat apps.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I've always been a little bit, bearish on chat apps, to be honest, just because I've had trouble kind of figuring out like where they slot into everything else, where, you have your project management, you have your Asana or whatever, you have your email, you have your text and phone for your Zoom. So I always kind of felt like, a lot of times Slack was creating like a lot of noise that it was like square peg in a round hole. Like it was hard to figure out where it fit into everything else. But I'm totally open to the idea that we were doing it wrong and we didn't set it up the right way. So, I've read a lot of different philosophies on this. I think one of them that impressed me recently was the Basecamp guys wrote this manifesto. I don't know if you're familiar with that or not, about where chat apps should fit into everything else in team communication. But I'd love to hear, your take on that. Like, where do you think, what sort of communication should be handled on chat apps, what shouldn't, and so on?
Well, that's a big complaint about chat apps, that they're like, they could be very annoying and they pull you in all the time. But I think that is mostly about like not having good etiquettes around it. So when do you use the chat app? What kind of messages are you going to use? Are you replying people, or how are your notifications set up? So if you have some company guidelines around that, or some personal guidelines as well, then it doesn't have to be very disruptive in your workflow, and it could be very like a nice way to communicate, or a nice place to communicate. I'm not familiar with the exact thing that the Basecamp people are talking about. I know they are pretty, they have some really interesting ideas on a lot of things.
Yeah, they're very contrarian. Yeah.
So I'm not quite sure what they think about chat apps. I guess they're not a fan.
No, it's more nuanced than that. I think they are a fan for certain things. So anyway, I don't remember well enough to rehash it, but to not beat up chat apps. I think it sounds like there's obviously lots of value, and there's teams everywhere that are making Slack do amazing things. Can you talk a bit about some tangible examples, just kind of how you see camaraderie and culture really being built on these apps, and just kind of how you see that playing out in your world?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what I really like is, especially like I like the asynchronicity about it. So if you're not around because you have your day off, or you're in another time zone, if you're just walking the dog, or you're not working at that time, you can still like read up on everything, on the conversations. So yeah, instead of like doing it like directly, you just missed a meeting or whatever. But what I like about chat apps is that you can then also like have different channels for things, like a winning channel where you celebrate all the wins in the company, or the personal gains, or whatever. So if there's something to celebrate, like, yeah, I just ran my first 10K. That was amazing. Or, hey, we closed this big client. Or, hey, this A/B test broke a record and is doing great. Could be all kinds of things. And then you see others like piling on that celebration, and you get like this like thing like, hey, yeah, there's positive vibe around that, but also just sharing things about like, hey, what have you done this weekend? And I went hiking, or I went to a football match. And then people are like, oh yeah, I love hiking as well. Hey, I went to this place last summer. Here's some pictures. And with these like interactions, you do get to know your team members a bit better, which then strengthens your relationship because like you create a bit more personal rapport, which helps like with your relationship amongst each other, but then also helps when you need each other, when there's a project going bad, or you have to like pull an all-nighter or whatever, because those bonds are much stronger. You can then like get it as a real team instead of like sitting there all by yourself in the dark.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on like camaraderie building in these sort of mixers, in a remote environment, right? Because it used to be that you would have like an offsite once or twice a year, and it'd be fun, and it would be during your normal working hours. And my girlfriend has gotten like dragged into a lot of the remote kind of mixers where you're like working late and you're like doing these little games with people, and it always feels like everyone's kind of awkward. I don't know if anybody's having a ton of fun. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. So I just love to hear your thoughts on that. Like, how much of this stuff do you think can be effectively mimicked remotely versus what should you just give up on and just admit that you're not going to be able to do it justice?
So it's different. Working remote and not having an office is different than working in an office, of course. So you can't expect the same things there. So with working remote, you gain a lot more freedom about like how you schedule your day, where you work, how you dress, stuff like that. But with like working in an office, yeah, you have more of these like human interactions. So yeah, they both have their advantages. So I love when you're in a remote working situation, try to meet each other. Like the way you communicate online goes so much better after you actually met each other in person. These mixers are super important. And yeah, with travel restrictions, it's difficult to do those. But when things are opening up again, yeah, definitely do that if you're working in a remote team.
Yeah, and I think about that a lot because I think that if this is hard for everybody. The transition I think is really tough regardless of where you are. But I feel like if I was early career and starting in an agency and I was only working remotely, I don't know what I would have accomplished. It definitely would have been a lot less. Just not being able to easily build those connections and everything, and friendships, which led to other things and so on from there. So I would say that it would be really hard if you were just starting out somewhere to advance, in a remote context. But with that in mind, like, can you talk a bit more about Otira at this point and just kind of like how does it work? Like, what are you doing with it? How are you using it to build more connections between employees?
Yeah. So it's harder. Like with what you just said, it's harder if you haven't never met people online to create that rapport, to create that connection. But it's still very much possible. There's like plenty of like online relationships going on, or people who are gaming together, or also in remote team settings. You just have to be aware of it and work on it. Like try to craft those relationships. You have to be mindful about it. What Otira does is that she helps you with that. So instead of like you as a team leader or someone, if you're lucky enough, someone active in your team, asking about like, hey, how was the weekend? Otira will ask like, hey guys, I never been outside because I'm an artificial entity. But what did you do this weekend? Because it was super quiet. It's like, and what Otira does is she really is a character. So there's like a backstory there, and she really communicates as an entity instead of just like a dumb bot saying like, hey, post a picture of your weekend. Because of that, she becomes also a bit part of the team, and people are more inclined to actually post that. But then people posting their how their weekend was, people start reacting on that, and that creates relationships. Like I said before, because like now you know a bit about the personal lives of these people, and you can relate to that as well. So what Otira does is she tries to, on one side, she tries to engage people in more of these social communications by like instigating like these discussions or asking questions a couple times a week, which people can then respond to or not if they're not finding it interesting or whatever. So that's one of the ways that Otira works with that. The other way.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just going to say, it almost reminds me of like how a musician will put a $5 bill in the case, and then people will see that people have donated, and then it'll encourage, more donations. It's almost like that. Like, so if I understand right, she's kind of like seeding content and interacting with people, and then that's going to encourage a lot more interaction.
Yeah, that's an interesting analogy. Like you have to key it a bit. You have to like give a little nudge for something to happen, and that's what Otira does in those cases. But also as like you as a business owner or a team lead, you have the responsibility, or it's in your best interest to put it a bit more like that, to build a strong team. So you also want to know how your team is doing, and not so much like if they're doing their task, if they're still performing there, because you kind of see that in your project management tool, but how are they doing like personally, because that gives you a bit of an idea where their energy levels are, and if they're like trying to burn out, or if they're maybe looking for another job or something. So what Otira also does is doing these little pulse reports, pulse surveys, basically, where she asks each team member like a couple questions, like did something interesting happen last week, or how are you actually feeling, or and then or where were you struggling with? And these are quite these questions are then asked in such a way, also more in a conversational tone, which is emphasized with like chat. You're basically just chatting with Otira, which makes it that you're more inclined to answer truthfully, and these reports or these answers can go back to you as a team manager, team lead, or business owner, and you can actually get quite a good feel, especially over time, how people are actually performing, or how they're doing now, if they're having a rough time, or there's some issues, or which you can then help them with to then feel better, and then also be better employees.
Yeah. And what are you finding in terms of people's openness to interact with the robot?
Well, because of the people don't really see, or they forget that Otira is a robot. They know it, but because of the way the questions are phrased, and because there's like some personality behind it, it doesn't feel like you're just like answering a bot. So it's people are inclined, or they're actually starting conversation, or like responding to her like, oh yeah, Otira, I went to the woods and whatever, blah blah. So it becomes a conversation, and that's the difference between like a lot of other tools, or like an email survey or whatever. It's the form that you fill out. So it becomes more personal as well. But it also depends on how you interact or react with it as a team lead, where you do have to follow up with these things, because it's data there, and people are like being vulnerable, and you have to let them feel that they can be vulnerable, and that you actually do something with what they're telling you there.
Yeah, that makes sense. So in what way are team leaders kind of setting up Otira for the team? How are they introducing this person, or this quote unquote person?
It's actually quite simple. You invite her to your Slack base. So you basically install it as any other Slack app. And she's now just in Slack. We're now working also on a Microsoft Teams version. But and she kind of does all the work. She introduces herself like, hey, I just Dan invited me to the team. This is what I do. I've been like asking some questions and trying to engage with you guys. So she'll introduce gradually her feature set and
Sure, but it's not. It's obviously it's not trying. Like, everybody knows that it's an AI, right?
Yeah.
I'm not sure how many teams you're working with now, but is the idea that are people setting policies like you're expected to interact with Otira if you want to just put up a wall and not interact with it? Like, is that okay too, or how are you seeing this play out?
Yeah, so that's up to the teams as well. So Otira, we just launched, and there's like a whole kind of stuff that we are still building. But one of the things is like, hey, what you can do is like sentiment analysis, like how people are responding to her. If they're not responding to her, that's also interesting data for a team lead to know. So like, hey, this person in your team is not really communicating with me. I'm not sure what's up with them. Maybe you should check in with them personally. And then you as a team leader could then like nudge your teammate to do answer Otira, or maybe do it like on a more personal level.
Yeah, it's funny because like one part of my brain is like, oh, this is super, like science fiction-y and weird, and then the other side of my brain is like, well, people are sent surveys all the time, and they're going to be anything less personal than a survey, and that's something that in many companies you're expected to fill out, and that's kind of cold and doesn't really do much for you. And this seems like it's better than that, right? So it's definitely interesting.
It feels a lot more personal, but it definitely depends on how you as a team lead interact with that and follow up with it. Because you have to keep it personal. It's your team. It's not that like Otira can do anything. So Otira is an assistant for you to manage your team better.
Right. Where's I going to go with this? And it's living on Slack and everything. So are there? Yeah, I guess are there other features? Are there other interesting things that you're doing with it that are just like use cases that are coming up?
Well, it's Otira is designed to strengthen remote teams and help you become a better manager by giving you like the data there. So everything around that, we're constantly evolving and improving on that, making her like feel more human, or more, not so much human, but that's the wrong term in this, but more like improving her communication skills, but also like trying to like she learns like how much interaction your team needs, for example. So these are things that we keep on working with. It. Like, do you want to nudge your team every day with like an update, or like to instigate in some conversations, or like is once or twice a week enough? It depends on the team, of course, and it depends on like and these kind of settings or these kind of things should be like more like automated and more intelligently.
Right. That makes sense. And, kind of back to what we were talking about earlier, the idea of like facilitating, interactions between team members that might not normally interact. Is that something that Otira is doing, or that you're planning on building in at some point?
Yeah, no, definitely. It's Otira wants you to communicate with your team members and all the team members in between each other. So that's definitely something that's on the roadmap to see how we can do that as well, improve on that, like see if there's connect people more randomly, or like, hey, something like, hey, Otira learns like about everyone. So if she knows that, hey, you're really into anime movies, and I know Dan is also really into anime movies, like, hey, guys should connect, because, well, maybe you should do like a online watch party with some like anime or whatever, stuff like that.
Right. That makes sense. And just to kind of like dig into the problem that it's solving a little bit. So like, what's the situation on the ground a lot like in these teams? Like it's Slack, and Slack's just kind of this dry place for work, and not enough is being, there's not enough connection being made. Is that kind of what you tend to see, or is it just that it's a desert and nobody's communicating at all, or like what's usually happening, and what does Otira kind of look to help with?
It depends a lot on the team.
Mm-hmm.
If you have someone in your team who is very socially adept and once is posting a lot, that really helps with other people also posting. So it really depends on the team. What I do see is that most founders or team owners are like too busy to really. They're working on projects, they're communicating with clients, and then the team is just expected to do the job, do the tasks, meet the deadlines. And especially in like a remote team, then the personal touch is getting lost and getting forgotten. So Otira will like help with that by like nudging you and giving you like updates. And so yeah, that's basically where the real value is, to help you become a better manager and help your team there, because everyone's just too busy and not really like just focusing on the tasks. And that's also what you see in Slack a lot. Like it's mostly about like projects or whatever, and sometimes the random funny GIF or.
Yeah, very cool. And then with that, have you seen any results of that bonding and that cultural improvement that have surprised you? Or is there anything that might be a little bit counterintuitive that you've seen happen with the teams you're working with?
Yeah, what I said before, what really surprised me was that people really start interacting with Otira as if she's an entity and really asking her questions as well. So that's for me is a sign that she really becomes like part of a team. And that people really respond towards each other. Like, hey, if you ask them to share something, then the rest of the team members like really pile up on that and share as well. And that's really something that's really cool to see, and makes me as a team owner really proud. But now also when I get data back from Otira, that other team did the same thing, and it's just really cool to see your team bonding. It's a bit like I've got a couple kids now, and it's really nice to see them play together. Like, oh yeah, it's really nice, and it's a bit of the same feeling. Like your team members also have like your children as a team owner, or like you feel responsible for them, and it's really nice if they get along.
Well, it's definitely fascinating, man. I'd love to look forward to seeing how it evolves. So I guess kind of getting towards the end of the time, where are you with it now? Is this something that people that are using Slack can download, and where can they go to get it, and so on?
Yeah, you can get some more information at otira.com.
That's Otira, correct?
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
Otira. And we now are installed. It's in private beta. So there's now some teams that are having installed. We're getting feedback from it, updating some of the features, and So if someone's interested, drop me a note through the website, or find me on Twitter at Martijn Reintjes, and I'll hook you up.
Awesome, man. Martijn, thanks so much for your time, and we'll get that linked up.
Perfect. Thanks, Dan.
Take care, man. Yeah, good to see you.